Hey, I'm Similar Outskirts, and today I'm gonna friend. Hey, I'm Similar Outskirts, and today I'm gonna show you the project file for Shade Soul, my new track out now on Rushdown. Let's check it out. Blah 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 blah. Ooh. I'm sure a lot of you guys already know that this track takes a lot of inspiration from the game Hollow Knight. For those of you who aren't aware, Hollow Knight is a 2D action adventure game about a protagonist that explores a vast underground world full of bugs and different creatures. And it has a very Halloween-like kind of spooky, creepy vibe to it. So I wanted to write a track that kind of had that spooky vibe, but also had this color-based kind of tinge to it. So here is how the track starts. So we'll just take it from the top here. I just have a couple of cymbal swells here. Moving down, we have some of these interesting little effects that just introduce the track. And underneath here, we have some hi-hats. We have my classic little wind chime ride fill thing. I don't know. And underneath that, we have this little sine wave kind of sound. It's the same one that I used in Crescent, if you remember that one. I also have this little reverb clap sound here. One of my favorite kind of reverb delay plugins is a plugin called Supermassive Valhalla. What was it called? Valhalla Supermassive? I don't know, something like that. I'll put on. It's on the screen right here. It's free. Here are some of the drums. This is a nice little like wooden kind of snare on top here. And I also have this little percussion wood layer just to give it a little flam. So here are the synths. Spooky. So right on top here, we have this little plucky bell here. It's actually the same bell that I used in my track Alloy. Right below it, we have this little bassy saw synth. Next, we have this little vocal swell with a tiny bit of flanger on it just to make it a little more interesting. I think one really cool sound you can do to give a spooky vibe to your track is to add some sort of reverse piano sound. So here I have just that. All I did was just have a piano playing some notes, and then I bounced that out and then reversed it. So you get this effect. Got more reverb bells. Little sprinkly. And here I have a little bubbly, colorful sound that I use using a convolution reverb. It's actually funny, the way I got this original sound was I just recorded myself making a bunch of weird sounds and then trying out the convolution reverb. Pew! Lovely. This is just a bounced out version of some of the sounds in the drop, and I use it as a little filler sound just to kind of introduce the idea of the drop before it actually comes. And you could see here that I think, I used a low pass filter and swept it in. I have some more bells using this VST called M1. I have another bell here using Massive just to introduce the melody before it actually gets into the main part before the drop. I think another really cool thing that you can do to give your track a spooky vibe is to add a little vibrato to these small tiny synths that you have. This is a really simple massive patch with a triangle wave and a saw wave. Here on the bottom right, you can see that I just crank the vibrato up, so then it has a little wobbly kind of feel to it. Down below here, what do I have down below? Deep, down, low, deep. The sub bass here is actually an Ableton preset called Hip Hop Sub Bass. I just made my own version of that and just called it my hip sub down here. It's a really nice sub bass patch because it has these like little overtones that you can hear. Just gives it a little bit more of a warmer feeling. And finally below we have some like white noise and other impact things. Oh, I don't know what this is. What is this? Some kind of like rising and falling saw wave, something like that? I don't know. Oh yeah, it looks like I'm automating the pitch knob in the sample and hold effect. I don't know, it just that thing. And that's pretty much it for the intro. So here is the main melodic section. I really do love the melody in this track because I think it really, again, sets up like a creepy tone to the track, but it's also super catchy. I really do want to make a video where I explain my thought process on how to write catchy melodies, but I'll save that for another time. On top here, we have some percussions and stuff. Just have this fun little percussive loop. And we have this little clap sample. And later on, we have this little cymbal just to make things more exciting before the drop. Here we have the drums building up. So here I have both this 909 snare and the kick down here. And they're both being low passed, but they're slowly opening up over time. So it gives that more rising kind of feeling for the drop. Oh, I just hit my mic. Here are the background synths. Here I just have some warm little chords using Serum. Here I have a string ensemble by Spitfire. And underneath here I just have this little reverb bell to just fill up the background. And here I have the main melody. So it's made up of mainly two different sounds. The top sound here is a massive patch. This is a super simple sound and made massive. This is just a saw wave with a really fast LFO being placed on the pitch. And it gives this little buzzy, wavy effect to the sound. And it's just something I really like to do in a lot of my leads. And underneath here is the M1 VST again. And this time I'm using this, I'm assuming a vibraphone sound or something. This just gives the attack to the lead. Halfway into the build-up, we have another synth on top of it starting to slowly fade in, just to again make the build-up a little more exciting. And again, this M1 VST just to have that little melody before the drop. We have this little vocal sample here that I've just tucked in the background just to give it a little more, I don't know, I just thought it'd sound cool. You can also see that I have a frequency shifter on this vocal sample that's slowly rising up to get ready for the drop. And again, just some impacts and other cool sound effects on the bottom here. So before the drop hits, I have a couple more sounds underneath that main bell sound to also just to get ready for the drop. Again, here I have this piano sample that's been reversed to kind of lead into the drop. Now here are again some of the sounds from the drop that are just being placed here just to introduce the idea before it actually drops. In this case, what I do is I actually have two different effects on it that are being automated. I have this reverb that makes the sound really wet and then dries out over time so it starts to come back in. I also have a frequency shifter so it starts below and then it starts dragging it back into place. I think the main idea here is that I wanted the sound to be not the main focus, kind of in the background, and then it slowly comes into the main focus of the track when you start fading everything back in. And this is a little riser here. And a little sub impact. Another thing I also do here is I high pass the entire sound so that it just takes away all of that sub bass and all that rumbly low end. And then once the drop hits, it just feels a lot more impactful. Let's go to the drop. So here's the drop. The thing to know about this first drop is it sounds very kind of dry and not really much happening. It starts to progress and progress more, so it just sounds a little more interesting over time. So you can see here that the cymbals are pretty bare minimum in the beginning, then you start adding more and more later. So here we just have this really dry cymbal sound on the offbeats. And then later we have this open kind of hi-hat ride cymbal thing, whatever, on the downbeats. Here are the kick and snare. The snare here is actually just a regular snare, but all I did was I just took out the 200 hertz body low end and then just saturated it a bit. So it sounded more like a clap sample rather than like a boofy kind of snare. And then I layered it on top of this samplifier kick. Very punchy. One thing I really do want to point out about this drop is that all the sounds are very cut short and there's a lot of spaces in between the sounds. I really wanted everything to be timed properly so that they all have their appropriate space in the mix. One example of that is actually the snare here. You can see that this snare tail is not very long, for this drop at least. I cut it only like at half the bar just because I wanted all the sounds, again, to have their own place one after another. And continuing along with that idea, we have the drop elements. So here we have the main little bleepy bloopy sound. And this is a very, very simple sound. I have it frozen here, but I can tell you right now that the serum patch right here is literally just the init saw wave with some noise. And that's it. The main character of the sound really comes from the distortion and saturation I put on top of it. I have it disabled for this computer, but I actually have a Camel Crusher distorting it. And then I followed it up with a saturator that's boosted 36 decibels and then an OTT. I don't know. It was also it sounded very, very harsh. So I took out some of the high end as well with the EQ over there. And of course, to make it a little more interesting over time throughout the drop, I changed up the notes here and there. And even later in the track, it starts to get a little more weird and complicated and bleepy bloopy, whatever. It's kind of fun playing around with all these notes. Since their sounds are very cut short again, you can kind of just spam the notes wherever you want in the key and it would kind of sound nice and pretty. So moving down, we have a couple of more sounds here. This is just a bass sound that I've rendered out. I've had for a while. I just thought it'd be a nice layer to add to the track. I have this little wavy supersaw here. I just have this white noise sample. I cut out a lot in the frequency spectrum, so I have this shape here. But I like it because it gives a nice little hissy sound. It sounds cool when it's all rhythmic like that. Again, here's just another little bass sound that I've rendered out that I've had for a while. It just fit the mood here. Underneath, we have just a little bit of ambience to fill up the space. And underneath, we have this little buzzy saw wave that I use to fill up the low end. This is a super simple like bass saw that you hear a lot in some bass music nowadays. It's really just a saw wave with some noise and you distort it somehow. So in this case, I'm just using the classic tube effects here to distort it. And again, I want to reiterate that a lot of these sounds are cut short and very appropriately placed so that they all feel rhythmic and you get a sense of that flow, like da da hey hey. And there's a couple of more sounds sprinkled in between the main sounds just to keep things interesting. Like I got a little laser sound here. I also have this really colorful little chordy laser here. So here I have the chord written out like so. And then I have this super saw kind of thing, and you can see this is the low pass here that's filtering it. And here in the effects is where I have this downsample effect. Some more weird glitchy sounds. This is just, I think it's a must-die bass that's just been cut up and repeated over and over again to give a weird sound. Some more must-die little fills here. Some record scratches. A cool little transitional thing I do here in the middle of the drop is I have this little reverb kind of fake out and then pull it back in. I have this little rack here called the washout that I made. It's just a combination of some delay, reverb, and a little high pass filter just to take out the low end. So what happens is that all of the sounds get washed out by the delay and reverb, and then it just comes back in. Just a nice little cool effect just to fake people out. Yeah, that's actually really all of the sounds here. The way I make the drop a little more interesting over time is really the melody that plays on top of it. Halfway into the drop, we just have this little vocal sample here that's just chanting away before it finally hits. A little yelling sample. Some of the vocal chants that you hear in between those sounds is actually a recording of myself. Recently, I've just been recording my own vocal chants and shouts just because I think it gives the track a little bit more of a unique flavor for myself. So here's all these samples of myself yelling.
Let's go!
And also this one.
All right!
For this sub bass in particular, I just have two sine waves, one just playing that low D and then another an octave higher. It's a little lower in volume, so it's not taking up all of the subspace. I introduced another little transitional effect here in the second half of that drop. Along with the whole washout effect that happened earlier, I also have this little low pass filter here that's sweeping down and back in. I also have some percussion stuff on top to make things a little more interesting. Just this little reverb Foley feel. Some weird rising thing, I don't know. Drum fills. Oh, and this little tiny snare to give a little bit more of a groove to the drop. Here's what it sounds like in the context of all the other percussion. And that's it for the first drop. So now we have this little breakdown section here. So as things start to cool down right after the drop with all these synths here, I really just reused the same stuff from the intro, but I just repurposed it a little bit here. The chords here are just the same. The little plucky bell earlier, I changed the melody, so it's a little different now. What is this? Who are you? What are you? So some time passes, and I introduced this little tiny synth just to mirror the bells that are playing on top here. I just thought it fit really well. It's a little vocal sample I like to use in a lot of my tracks nowadays, with a little vocal swell before it. We have a couple of new percussion stuff here. Some loops here to get the feel going. I like the little fun things I do with the hi-hat loop here. I start panning the track left and right, and I pitch it down almost using the frequency shifter over here. That's cool. I introduced a new kick here. This one is a bit more of an acoustic kick. I just felt it was appropriate for this part of the song. Here I use the same little M1 VST bell sound from the intro, and I just play the exact same melody that the bells on top are playing here. Alright, and then we have the second buildup, which is only slightly different than the first buildup. One of the main difference is there's a little transitional effect halfway into the buildup. There's a little glitchy must-die sample here, a little cymbal hit here, and a lot of the other elements are being kind of frequency shifted down and back up to give that little movement. This little rack here has a frequency shifter. It's pulling everything down and back up, and a little bit of a high pass filter just so the low end doesn't feel too muddy. The other main difference, I believe, is the change in the melody. You can see in the second half of the melody, the notes get a little bit higher and play a little different notes. One thing I will say about melody writing is that generally when the melody starts going higher, it's usually a good indicator that the climax is about to happen. Since this is near the end of the track, I just wanted to change the melody to go a little higher, then it just feels more exciting and feels a bit more of like a conclusive ending. And then finally, we have the second drop, which is a little heavier. A lot of the percussions and stuff are kind of the same. Since this drop is a little more full force and it's not as choppy, I started to be a little more lenient with how the sounds are being placed and cut. This snare here isn't as short anymore. It has a little more of a tail to it. Scroll down here, we have all the bass sounds. I have the same little buzzy lead sound that you heard in the first drop. It's a little more quicker, so it's a little more exciting now. Layered with that lead is actually a harmony now. Again, as the drop goes on and on, some of the notes start changing just to keep things a little more interesting. Some of these sounds are still the same. I did, however, introduce a new, more gritty bass right underneath it, so it feels a little more sustained, a little more longer, a little punchier. These are actually the same basses from an old track of mine called Chaos. I just repurposed it for this song. Very, very gritty, very aggressive. I also have a new little bass here that acts as a little filler. This bass here is just a very, very scratchy kind of serum bass that I made. I put a resonator on it, so it played some chords with it. I also want to note that I rendered this bass out because I wanted to start chopping it more and give it a different rhythm throughout the track. And that's pretty much it for that first half of the drop. Of course, the second half is a bit different. I always just love sections where it's just big supersaws, big drums, and a really catchy melody on top. So that's exactly what I just did here. So to lead into this drop, I have some percussion on top here. A clap sample just to lead into the drop. You can see here that the new lead is starting to get introduced and starts to fade in through, I think, a low pass. Is it a low pass? Yeah, it starts being low pass in here. Same goes for all of these synths down here. And finally, we have some new cymbals up here to give it a bit more of a rhythmic driving force. We have the same kick here, but we have a new snare that's just a normal boofy kind of snare. Since this one has more of a climactic kind of feel to it, this one just feels bigger. It's got some reverb to it, so it feels like you're in a big hall. And here we have the new lead. This lead is made up of a couple of different sounds here. For starters, we have this massive sound. It's kind of the same idea as the other bell sound, where I put the LFO, really fast LFO on the pitch and have it move around, so it's got that buzzy texture to it. In this case, I just let it play out instead of just the pluck. In addition, I also have a pitch envelope. So I have envelope 1 here on the pitch, and it's shooting up and down really, really fast, so it gives a little bit of an attack to the sound. On top of that, I have this sample of a Stonebank lead that I just felt was appropriate to fill up the space. You can see here in the MIDI, I have some little pitch bends here and there just to keep things a little more interesting so it's not so static. I also have another massive preset here to give another texture to it. This kind of reminds me of that old Pegmore Nerd song, Pressure Cooker. It's got that little buzzy kind of sound to it. It's a really classic sound that a lot of producers used back then, or kind of nowadays too. I just thought it sounded cool here. Every now and then there'll be a little break section in between some of the leads. I just thought it sounded cool to break up the section a little bit just to keep things fresh. This one's just a really simple, what is this? I don't even know. It's just a square wave. It's got a little vibrato on it to make it creepy. It kind of fades out so that the other synths can come back in. Later throughout this drop, I start adding in this M1 VST bell, again to give it a little more attack to it. One thing to note about this M1 VST here is that it's not being sidechained. That way the little attack of the vibraphone can stick out a little bit more. It's not too loud to the point where the drums and stuff are being drowned out, but it still makes a difference. I have this little harmony layer also right above it. Alright, and below here we have all the chords. On top here we have the same string library I used in the build-up. I have a more wavy kind of supersaw here. It just gives a little bit more rhythm to the drop. I have a normal little saw stack here. And this M1 VST again is now playing a choir. Here I'm using the same gritty bass that I used a little bit earlier in this drop. This one also has a more rhythmic feel to it. It's pumping in and out. That's a car. These synths also start to cut in and out between the drops to let that little tiny lead come back in. In between those parts are also another set of little bass fills right down here. Just a little growl. Yarl. A laser. Bleep bloopies. Yelling. And another little bass patch that I've rendered out from a long time ago. So if you layer it with the melody, it sounds like this. Some sub bass. I forgot the little lead melody here also comes with its own harmony later on. So together. And finally, the track comes off to a close. And that's pretty much it for Shade Soul. Really quick, the mastering is just using Ozone 8. I really won't get into the specific details, but it's just a combination of equalizer, dynamics, imager, a post EQ, and then a maximizer for a sausage. All right, that's gonna do it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you did enjoy, I would appreciate a like, leave a comment if you have any suggestions, subscribe to the channel to keep up with new updates. Again, I wanna mention Shade Soul and Vessel are out now on Rushdown. Feel free to stream it on any platform you choose, and I'll see you guys next time. Little baby.